Back in about 1997, I lived on the island of Roatan with my girlfriend Mary in a big old house that had a deck around it that overlooked the Caribbean, right over Anthony's Key Resort, and directly over a restaurant called Rick's American Cafe. And we used to go to Rick's all the time, and we'd hang out there and meet all kinds of people. And we met this guy named Max, who came to the island in a big splash. So you have to understand, the island of Roatan had a lot of people hiding out from the law. And Max was kind of one of those guys, although he's a very nice guy from Georgia. And he got along very well with my girlfriend Mary because she was from Georgia. And he could act like very much of a gentleman, and we liked him. So Max was he had run into some bad business deals, and I may tell that whole story later. But suffice to say, Max wasn't going back to the United States. And so he was on the island of Roatan, and he was building houses. And we had another friend who owned a hotel down the island a ways. Andy was his name, and Andy collected guns. Andy was former government or law enforcement or something, and Andy had a connection with the Honduran government, and I could tell stories about Andy too, but one day, Andy and Max got to drinking, and Andy sold Max several firearms, including an M16 rifle, fully automatic rifle. And Andy knew, or Max knew I was from Texas, and so he wanted to show this to me. He bought the rifle. He bought all these great big banana clips, like 50 rounds in them, and sort of flash suppressors and cases and pistols, all kinds of stuff. Anyway. He thought I would want to see these firearms, and so he brought them up to the house one day. And we lived in this house, like I say, way up on top of this hill, and had a big deck around it. And Max came up this one day, and I was not there. But Mary was there by herself. And he came in and said, "Hey, where's Steve? I want to show him my new firearms, my new automatic weapon." Although he didn't say that. He just said, "Hey, this is my new rifle. I want to show Steve." And Mary said, "Well, Steve's not here right now." And he said, "Well, look, let me show it to you." And so she was like, "Okay." Mary, you have to understand, was very meek and mild. She had never hardly even held a firearm, except maybe a .22 rifle in summer camp, back in Georgia. She was a very passive type person. And so she said, "Well, okay," and Max brought this thing out onto the deck, overlooking the ocean, and put it in her hands. He put this gun in her hands, and it was fully loaded, and he, cocked the bolt back and got it ready. And she was like, "Okay," and they told me this story afterwards because I was not there. I was not present. So, she says, "Okay," she's holding it. What do I do? And he's like, "Okay, point it out there, at the ocean, and just squeeze the trigger, And so she's like, "Oh, okay, that might be fun." And I don't think she realized, what kind of weapon it was. It was on fully automatic. And later, Max told me when she squeezed that trigger, she just kind of froze with her eyes really big, and it went, and she was just like, and finally, she just held on to it till it ran out of bullets, And Max just laughed his ass off, thought it was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. Mary's like, "You here? You better take it back." And so Max said, "Well, gosh, that was fun, tell Steve to give me a call, and I'll bring him back by and show it to him." She's like, "Okay." So Max gets in his truck and leaves. All right. So unbeknownst to Mary, just below our house at Rick's American Cafe, there was about 2 or 3 dozen tourists enjoying a very lazy Jimmy Buffett sort of afternoon with shrimp on the grill and margaritas and just having a nice peaceful time, when all of a sudden, right over the roof of that building came about 50 rounds of automatic weapon fire. And the reports came in later that there were tourists diving for cover behind the bar. They were under the tables. Their drinks were everywhere. There was, food, and people running, because we're in Honduras after all, man. They think the Sandinistas are after them, And I mean, there was pandemonium in this restaurant, all right? And tourists were just running off, not paying their bills, just heading for the hills, right? So Mary is up in our house up above, peacefully trying to recover from this automatic, gunfire event. And Max is, of course, nowhere to be found. When Rick, our friend, who was our friend, came tearing up that hill like a house of fire. And he burst into our house and started hollering, and Mary, who was already rattled, was what's the matter? He's going, God damn it, what's going on up here, And what are y'all doing? Have you been shooting weapons up here? It sounded like it came from this house. And she tried to lie at first. She was like, oh no, no weapons here, Rick. He's all red in the face, pissed off. And he looks out on that deck, and all he can see all over our deck is a bunch of bright brass shell casings shining in the sun. And I mean, he proceeded to just explode all over her, all right? And after he verbally tore a patch out of her back the width of an Iowa cornfield, he left. Told her to never come back to his restaurant, that we weren't friends anymore. And so, by the time I got home, my girlfriend Mary was in a crumpled heap in the corner, and she was crying so hard, it took an hour for me to get the story out of her. I didn't even know what had happened. I thought somebody had died. So the moral of this story, boys and girls, is that if you don't know anything about firearms or machines or tools or airplanes or whatever, it's best not to just go ahead and use it just because somebody says so. And that's my story about Machine Gun Mary. My friend Mike had to say something to her because we thought eventually we thought it was hysterical, and Mary was so deeply embarrassed by the whole event. And my friend Mike, he leans over after she had kind of recovered for a couple of days. We're having a drink, and he leans over and he goes, "Hey, I gotta say it, Machine Gun Mary."